Okay, so I finally have a new video camera, which is a good thing. I also have a new microphone, which is almost a good thing. The only catch is that every time I try to record with it, I get a whole bunch of static. I think it's a sound card. But in any case, the camera mic is going to have to do for now, which is actually still miles ahead of what I was using before. But enough about cameras and microphones. You're here to see a game, and today on Ancient DOS Games, we have a Sid Meier game of espionage and criminal masterminds. That's right, today we're doing Covert Action. And as you can see, I've got the box for this game, and it is just packed with stuff. I mean, here, let's take a look inside. First we have the 5 1/4 inch floppy disks, and this game came on 4 of them. And the interesting thing is, in doing research about this game, I noticed that it's much easier to find 5 1/4 inch discs than 3.5 inch discs. In fact, finding the game with 3.5 inch discs is almost impossible. And then we have the manual. Now, this is what you call a manual. This thing is thick. It's nearly 100 pages big, and it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it, ranging from controls to the gameplay types to little story tidbits to get you in the mood. And I'm kind of sorry for the autofocus going a little wonky. I'm still getting used to this camera. But one thing, though, is the manual does serve a dual purpose, because way at the back of this manual, once I get there, way at the back of the manual, you actually have a whole bunch of pictures of the various criminal masterminds that you'll encounter in the game. And this is important because this is actually how the copy protection works. Is the copy protection will show a whole bunch of randomly generated faces, and then you have to pick out the face that belongs to the organization that the game wants you to identify. And that's a pretty hard thing to do with a text file to copy over, so that's actually a good way of doing the copy protection. And then next in the box here we have what's called the player aid card. Well, I like to call it a player aid sheet because look at it, the thing's huge. But basically this is just controls of how to play the game and such. And it's kind of necessary because as you can see, there's a whole bunch of controls to this game. And then next we have the technical supplement, which is just basically installation instructions, to make sure you actually can get it working. Now this is interesting here. The best of times. Oh, it's one of these. Oh, yeah. A whole bunch of game companies, well, okay, not a whole bunch, but most of the game companies that were selling games in the 80s tended to do this thing where they'd actually print these color pamphlets that had all the different games they had for sale. And this thing does it too. And they'd actually have a little order form on it, so you could order the games directly from the publisher. And that's not exactly something a lot of game companies do anymore. So it's an interesting thing there. And of course, it's shameless self-promotion, but what do you expect? Whoever I bought this game from actually left the price tag on there. Okay. I also left the receipt in there too. I didn't even know Electronics Boutique existed that long ago. I don't know if that's December 1990 or February 1990. Oh well. And then, this was interesting. Microprose did this thing where you could actually get these wing stickers and enter contests to win prizes and stuff. It's kind of similar to what Activision did with their Atari 2600 games, where you could sort of get these special emblems and such. And then, this is interesting. The cards that you can get a keyboard overlay for a Tandy computer. I wonder why it says you have no photocopies. Oh, of course. No photocopies allowed because they're giving it away for free. Well, save for shipping and handling. And then finally, a little order form so that you can get backup discs for your game. Which is kind of weird because there's no disc-based copy protection, so why couldn't you just make your own backup discs? I don't know. So, as you can see, this box is just packed with stuff. They don't even make games like this anymore. Nowadays, you're lucky if the manual makes any sense. But enough about the stuff in the box. You want to see the game, right? Well, as soon as I finish packing all this back up, we're going to take a look at Covert Action for the PC. So let's talk about the game itself. Covert Action is one of those genre-defying games that features numerous components molded together. Specifically, there are 5 completely different gameplay systems going on, and at any moment you'll either be hunting for clues, driving vehicles, decoding encrypted messages, wiring electronics, or partaking in overhead action sequences. Now, as you might expect, because the game tries to incorporate so many different elements, none of those elements seem to excel at what they do. And it's kind of like how they say a jack of all trades is a master of none. It doesn't help either that the controls are based on old-style IBM keyboards where the F1 through F10 keys are arranged together on the side of the keyboard rather than across the top. So, the controls can be quite cumbersome sometimes. Control issues aside though, there's a ton of depth to this game, so let's get started with the game stats. Covert Action was designed by Sid Meier, most famous for the Civilization series of games, and developed and published by Microprose in 1990. It's a one-player game that crosses several genres, including action, adventure, mystery, puzzle. And it's really hard to say which genre it really belongs to though, so I'm not going to try. It supports multiple video modes, but except for its 4-color CGA mode, all of the supported modes look pretty much identical, even the 256-color VGA and MCGA modes. Just like Firehawk, come to think of it. Kind of seems like 1990 was the year of legacy graphics support without any real progress in the way of 256 color design. Well, except for stunts. Its sound support is extendable, meaning it not only supports multiple sound drivers to begin with, but can also load other drivers not yet created when the game was released. And that said though, I wasn't able to find any custom drivers for the game prior to this review. Every built-in sound mode is completely different from each other. Heck, even the PC speaker mode has its pros and cons. So really, choose whichever mode you feel like listening to. Personally, I feel the Tandy 3 voice support makes it sound like a Sega Game Gear game, but I find I like the ad-lib mode the most. As for its release date, it's still commercial, and finding a copy is not easy, but not impossible. Be prepared to pay quite a bit for it though, and also pay careful attention to the copy you buy because most of the copies out there come on 5¼ inch floppy disks, not 3½ inch disks. Now it's hard to say what the story of the game is, since everything this game has to offer is randomly generated, including the story elements. But to put it basically, you play the role of Max Remington, a CIA agent known for getting things done and catching the bad guys, going through a career with the desired end result of catching all 26 criminal masterminds known to exist. You also have a choice of playing as either Maximilian, a guy, or Maxine, a girl, and all this really does is change the kind of cutscenes you get at the end of each mission. So when you start a new game, 2 of the first things you'll have to choose are your difficulty level and your training. The 4 difficulty levels are Local Disturbance, National Threat, Regional Conflict, and Global Crisis. The higher the difficulty is, the more challenging the various subgames are, and the harder it is to find clues and evidence. You then get to choose your training, which actually determines how much of the difficulty is relaxed from the various subgames. There's 4 different skills you can train: combat, driving, cryptography, and electronics, and you get to train a total of 4 times. If you put all 4 training sessions into one skill, then that particular sequence will always be as easy as it gets, regardless of your skill level. For this reason, it's best to apply training to the sequences you find the most challenging. So for example, I hate the driving sequences, so sometimes I might put some training in there so I can actually perform them better. The catch there though is that if there's only one sequence you absolutely hate to do, you can usually avoid it. Most problems that you run into in this game have at least 2 solutions, so it's generally possible to completely avoid the sequence you hate the most. That said, combat is usually the best way to get clues and evidence, so that's one of the best skills to train in. Each mission follows the same basic format. You're told that something's going on, someone's probably going to try to mess with it, you get a few clues, and the game begins. At any point in time, you'll be located in a particular city and will have access to an airport, your hotel, the local CIA office, and a number of other locations you can either stake out, wiretap, or break into. Now every time you go somewhere or do something that in real life would take more than just a few minutes, time passes. And as time passes, people are on the move and the crime to be committed is slowly unfolding. Once enough time passes, or there's no one left to deal with, the mission comes to an end and you get a chronological breakdown of the events which transpired, not only between the people involved in the case, but your own actions as well. You're then scored based on who you caught, who you turned into a double agent, if you managed to secure any special evidence, and if you managed to prevent the crime from succeeding. And as you've seen so far, there's a lot of reading in this game, refreshing one's memory as to what's going on, what the clues are, who the suspects are, etc., etc. And you're always trying to plan the best way to achieve your goals, sometimes making your decisions based on the way the game plays and not what would make the most logical sense. And as I said before, not any single sequence in this game seems to excel at what it does. Well, that doesn't really... That's difficult to explain what I mean. Actually, I think Sid Meier himself said it best when he said, "The enduring memory I have from covert action is what I call the covert action rule, which is, it's better to have one good game than two great games." Now what that means is that no matter how good the many different games inside covert action are, they're competing with each other, and it's that competition between the various gameplay types that ultimately diminishes the game as a whole. Well, since all 5 of those gameplay types do form the core game, let's talk about each of them. Firstly is the clue gathering that serves as a portal to the rest of the gameplay mechanics. In this phase, you head to different buildings depending on what your intentions are. The airport is how you get around to the various cities. The hotel is where you can save your game or perhaps get a few clues to help you out. The CIA building is where you go when you want to check your wiretaps, do message traffic scans, or decode messages. And then there's all the other locations you're aware of for a city, sometimes only by name of the address until you've investigated the building to find out who exactly controls it. When you go to other buildings, you have several options, including breaking in, wiretapping the place, or staking it out, watching the various people come and go until you see a face you recognize from your clues or suspect files, at which point you can either drive after them or plant a tracer. So as you can see, with just a single paragraph, I managed to link all the various subgames together. You can do cryptography at the CIA building, breaking in puts you into combat mode, wiretapping and planting tracers requires electronic skill, and driving after someone requires driving skill. And I'll cover the combat last, since that's the most complex of the 4 other game types. First, let's get driving out of the way, because I don't really like the driving aspect. Before starting any driving, you get to choose 2 out of 4 vehicles the CIA has ready for you. Each vehicle is rated in its maximum speed, its handling, its conspicuosity, and whether or not it has tracking capabilities. Standard driving speed is 40 mph and goes as high as 80. Driving faster is a good way to get around a corner or block, but if you go faster while trailing the suspect, they'll go faster too. Handling is either fair or excellent, the latter allowing you to do U-turns. Conspicuosity determines how quickly the suspect will realize the vehicle's following them, and once they realize it, they may increase speed or choose an entirely different destination to throw you off. Tracking provides a sensor on the dashboard that always points towards the suspect vehicle. If you're trying to find where a suspect's going, you'll want to drive inconspicuous vehicles, whereas if you're trying to run the subject off the road to perform an arrest, then you want fast vehicles. And regardless of which ones you pick, try to make sure one of them has a tracking device. 2 can sometimes help, but it's mostly redundant, and if neither vehicle has one, then it becomes way too easy to lose track of your suspect. The whole point of the driving sequence is to either find out where a suspect is going, to arrest the suspect by driving them off the road, or on rare occasions when you just exit combat mode, you may need to escape from pursuers, thus switching the roles around. One thing that takes a lot of getting used to is constantly switching between and managing 2 different vehicles. Thankfully, every vehicle is able to do rudimentary following of a suspect and will do so by default until you press a directional control. So one thing you can do is have one vehicle always follow, preferably from a distance, and then use your other vehicle to ensure that you don't lose the suspect, or to get around ahead of them in order to run them off the road if you're trying to arrest them. If you happen to be being pursued, then the objective is to escape from your pursuers either by evading them for a certain period of time, or by ducking into any known location. And if you do get run off the road, a firefight will ensue. Driving is useful in 2 different ways. Firstly, it allows you to make an arrest without having to break into a building, but more importantly, it allows you to find the building suspects would normally be hiding in. You do this by staking out a building belonging to a group known to be involved in the current case, waiting to see the suspect come out of it, and then you trail them to their home base. Personally though, I find planting tracers a much easier prospect. So let's talk about the electronics aspect next. Whenever you want to wiretap a building or plant a tracer on a vehicle, you're presented with a circuit diagram and various chips to move around, with one chip always in hand. You need to swap chips on the board in an attempt to cut power to various transmission relays while avoiding sending power to any alarms, and you're working against the clock. If you run out of time, you're forced to abandon the attempt. Wiretapping a building is a good way to get information, and once you've succeeded at doing so, a local scan at the CIA building, or international scan if you're not in the same city, will sometimes pull even more information. Wiretapping is best used on buildings you don't want to waste time breaking into, because it takes less time and won't alert anyone to your activities. Planting car tracers is a better way to find buildings rather than trailing suspects, but you have very little time to do it, so you have to be very good at the electronics aspect to pull it off. Now, before going into the rest of the game, it's important to detail the 4 very specific kinds of evidence you can find, in order of usefulness. Firstly, you have what I like to call glimpses. Whenever you come across a photo or something that just has a brief glimmer of something seemingly important on it, you'll see a little TV-like box with either a word or picture in it. Now, if it's a word, it'll either be the name of an organization that might be involved, the name of a city being operated out of, or the name of a suspect. I recommend you actually physically write down any of these glimpses you see and keep track of which of them are going to lead you on the right path and which are dry leads. I'll explain why later. The other three kinds of evidence are clues, conversations, and what the manual affectionately calls smoking gun evidence. Clues are nothing more than possibilities, and in and of themselves cannot be used as evidence when arresting a suspect, but clues usually help you to figure out what steps to take. For example, a clue might indicate a particular building you should check out, it might provide the name of someone to investigate, or it may identify a particular organization that might be involved. Clues are automatically organized too, so that they specifically point to just one person. Conversation snippets are either coded transmissions or fragments of a face-to-face conversation, either of which can eventually become smoking gun evidence, which is basically positive proof of a suspect's involvement or non-involvement. Until you have smoking gun evidence and know the exact role of a particular suspect in the case, you can't arrest them. And even if they happen to be a notorious criminal or even a mastermind, unless you can prove they're involved, you can't hold them. Now, conversations are one of the fastest ways to get smoking gun evidence, and will always point out not just one but two potential suspects. Some conversations are face-to-face, and you have to build those conversations up by collecting evidence, but then there's encoded transmissions, which means we need to talk about the cryptography. Basically, sit yourself in front of a decoding station, and the encoded message is displayed on screen along with a listing of the quantities of each kind of letter used. Every letter decodes to another letter, sometimes on rare circumstances of the same letter. You simply press which letter you want to fill in, then the letter you want to replace it with. The cryptography is primarily a word game, and on higher difficulty settings, you either don't get immediate assistance, letters can spread out over multiple letters, and at the highest settings, you don't even get to see where the spaces are, which makes the task just that much harder. There's lots of various tricks you can use in the cryptography process. For example, if you see the combination GHJ, and then also the combination GHJZ, then you know that those two words have to be almost identical, save for that extra letter, which narrows the possibilities down considerably. It could be the and then, could be you and your, could be not and note. Suffice to say, a very good understanding of the English language is pretty much required. There is help though, and pressing the help key will do a possibility search and will positively identify one of the letters used. The only catch is that this burns a full hour of game time, and you may not even get a desirable result out of it. So at least try to do some of the decoding yourself beforehand. You can also erase any character you want by pressing the coded letter followed by space or backspace. A successful decryption will positively link two suspects to the case and give you the evidence you need to arrest both of them. And now we get into the meat of the game. The combat sequences. It is possible to play through an entire mission without ever performing any combat, but breaking into buildings is the fastest way to collect all the evidence you could ever need. The only catch to breaking in anywhere is that you'll almost certainly give away your presence in the city, and will subsequently be more likely to run into violent random encounters, which can sometimes be a plus side because such encounters may give you a clue as to who's involved and where their headquarters are. Presuming you survive. Before a combat sequence begins, you're given a silenced pistol and must choose 5 additional pieces of equipment to take with you. The first and most invaluable thing you could possibly take with you is your motion detector. This will display blips on the floor plan to indicate where everyone is and will help keep you from being surprised or overwhelmed by enemies. Next we have the camera, which is undoubtedly necessary for collecting evidence and doubly necessary if you want to collect the best kinds of evidence possible from the red floor safes. But to open those special safes, you also need the safe cracking kit. Red floor safes not only provide extra equipment like gas masks and floor plans, but can also provide you with very special evidence, such as inside information, lists of involved parties, but in particular, evidence that will either turn suspects into double agents, or directly identify where double agents have infiltrated the CIA. But we'll talk more about the double agent aspect later. Next we have the gas mask, which allows you to move through gas-filled rooms for as long as you need without becoming incapacitated. Next are your bugs, which when planted allow you to collect additional information and evidence while doing local and international scans. Next is the Uzi, which is silenced just like your pistol, but far more accurate and frequently able to take an enemy down even at long range on just the first shot. Then finally are your grenades, and you can choose between 8 packs of each kind or a 6-pack with 2 of each kind. The red ones are fragmentation grenades, which will incapacitate a target for several game hours, but they have a very small blast radius. The white ones are stun grenades, and they have a massive blast radius, but only work for a few game minutes, which go by much faster than you might think. Lastly are the green gas grenades, and they temporarily fill a room with knockout gas, and anyone breathing in that room for too long will be knocked unconscious until the gas dissipates. And do note, though, that the occasional enemy might have a gas mask on, and that once a room is filled with gas, even you can be knocked out by it. The actual combat sequence requires you to navigate the building and interact with various objects. Wall safes, desk drawers, even toilet tanks are all places where you might find evidence you can photograph. Such evidence can be any of the kinds the game has to offer, except the kinds that deal with inside information or double agents. Many other objects that you can't normally interact with, such as typewriters and potted plants, are places where you can hide bugs for doing message traffic scans later on. As the name of the game implies, though, you're trying to be covert about the entire thing. When you enter a room, shut the door behind you. When you photograph some evidence in a wall safe, close it. Try your best to leave the place exactly as it was when you entered. Otherwise, if someone in the building spots your tampering, they're going to set off the alarm. When the alarm goes off, the enemies will start chasing after you. So long as you stay out of sight, the alarm will eventually go back off. If you do end up confronting an enemy, try to incapacitate them as quickly as possible. If the alarm's off and you can take an enemy down within the first second of spotting them, the alarm may stay off, giving you the opportunity to disguise yourself. Wearing a disguise, though, doesn't make you immune to detection. See, whenever you're in the same room as another enemy, you have to consider which direction they're facing, which direction you're facing, and how far apart you are. The more easily an enemy can see your face, the more likely they'll clue in that you're an imposter. Now, despite how risky the combat sequences are, there's 3 reasons why you're going to spend a lot of time doing them. It's the only way to look up specific information via computers, it's the only way to confiscate items or devices that are used in the crime, and it's the only way to turn suspects into double agents. Using the computer terminals in the various buildings is the best way in the entire game to find out specific information, rather than just leave everything up to chance. For example, if you want to know where the Red Army headquarters are in Paris, you could either go to a Red Army HQ in some other city and look up Paris in their computer system. You could go to some other location in Paris and type in Red Army in their computers there. Or what's even more effective for getting really solid evidence is to look through the list of names you've been jotting down and type in one you don't really have any information on to see what you can find out about them. Accessing the computer systems, though, can be kinda troublesome. First, you need to get the password. Each time you access a computer, you'll get 1 letter of the current password. Once you think you know the password, you can access the terminal with a special button to bring up a password entry screen. Get the password right, and you can look up 1 piece of information. Get it wrong, and off go the alarms. Actually, even if you get it right, sometimes looking up stuff will still set the alarms off. It's a small price to pay, though, for getting such a direct source of information. As for turning suspects into double agents, this is essential for making high scores and prolonging the case so that you can crack down on more of the suspects. You see, if at any point in time a suspect completes their mission, or is incapable of completing their mission, they'll go into hiding. A suspect acting as a double agent, though, is actually on your side, but is still taking part in the crime, which means it's still possible for the crime to succeed depending on the circumstances. Though thankfully, if you manage to turn the person who's going to be responsible for the final act of the crime, they won't commit it. But it's not just suspects that can be double agents. Every so often, you might end up scratching your head as to why some set of clues isn't leading you anywhere useful. Well, in this game, double agents can also exist within the CIA itself. The simple way to find a double agent within the CIA is to open a red floor safe while in combat mode that explicitly says there is a double agent in such and such place. Usually you don't get that lucky, though. Another way to figure it out is if your clue that you have leads you to a person who is completely not involved with the case. That means there's something wrong with the clues, and if one of those clues happen to come from a particular CIA office, you know where your double agent is. There is one other way to figure it out, but it's not very reliable. At all points in time, the game tracks how covert you're being, and if you're making a lot of mistakes, breaking into a lot of places, etc., then the faction in the city involved with the crime will start posting extra guards. However, if you haven't done anything to warrant an increase in security somewhere, yet you encounter such an increase, that can also be an indication of a double agent at the CIA office in the city. This isn't a very reliable method, though, and accusing a double agent incorrectly will bar you from the local CIA office until you can actually make legitimate progress in your case. So that's Covert Action for y'all. A very deep game that's kind of at odds with itself and ultimately feels like a worthy but average attempt. If you like crime-solving games, you should definitely check it out. Just keep in mind it has a bit of a learning curve with its control scheme. If you're looking for a high-quality action game, though, then you'd probably best look elsewhere. As for DOSBox settings, the game does run perfectly fine with the max or auto cycles counts, but setting a fixed cycles count will make certain minor things more reliable. I recommend a cycle setting of 10,000. As for the scalers, you may like what they do, but you may not as well. This is because of the amount of facial recognition you have to do to play this game, and the graphics scalers can actually mess with you in that sense. The game does also have joystick support, but I didn't even attempt to use it because there's simply way too many constantly changing controls you have to worry about, so playing the game with the keyboards just makes the most sense. And that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. I'll get my new microphone working soon enough, but until then, I guess the camera mic will suffice. I mean, consider that before this I was using a webcam for both the video and audio. Yeah, explains a lot, doesn't it? Anyways, tune in next Saturday for episode 31, where we're going to take a look at a program that isn't itself a game, but rather a game creation system, or GCS. I'll give you another hint too. It did not come with centipedes. If you know what program that is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned as we turn on the text mode.